Grief is such an overpowering emotion, especially after losing someone so close to you. It can take months, years, even decades to get back to normal, if that's even possible after experiencing a significant loss. This podcast was created to help you move through and release the emotions, allowing you to heal the hurt and begin living again. Listen in as I chat with medical professionals, grief workers, and people who have first-hand experience in losing a loved one, what their experience has been, and what they did to help heal themselves and those around them. Life isn't always sunshine and rainbows, but I believe there is always a silver lining if you're willing to look. Welcome to the Release Podcast. Welcome to another episode of Release Grief Podcast. Today I am here with Miss Julia Pearce. Am I saying it correctly? Because I
Yes.
forgot to double check the pronunciation of the name ahead of time. I try to do that every time, but sometimes I forget. And so just double checking that it's Julia Pearce.
Yes.
And yeah, so I read your bio, what I had you fill out. It's not a lot because if I ask, I'll just give a little snippet on me before we start. If I ask too much information, because people are always like, well, don't you do like a pre-introductory thing? Don't you do like all these things? Don't you ask a bunch of questions? Don't you get to know them ahead of time? And I'm like, those are all great questions. And the answer is no, I don't. Because then I forget to ask the questions because I already know the answer. So therefore, I don't think to ask it. So I
Mm.
don't do a lot of research. Yeah, so that's kind of my husband asks me all the time, don't you know who they are? I'm like, I know their name and I know the topics we're about to discuss, but other than that, like everything's just revolves around grief. And
Yeah,
he's just like, wow.
I like it.
So
It's good.
anyway, welcome. Thank you for being on the podcast. It sucks you're on the podcast, but thank you for being a part of the podcast. And specifically, like, what did you want to talk about? Like, what topic were you covering today?
So the grief world is so expansive, right? So our grief came to us in stages, and that's an interesting piece because our son survived an illness when he was 2, and then he passed away after an extensive life that was filled with so many things, but he did pass away after extensive disability and illness almost 12 years ago. So that's what I would love to bring to you and your audience, is that perspective,
Sure.
beginning, middle, and continuation of grief.
I would love that. I think that a lot of people don't realize, like, as you're getting into these, I don't want to call them situations, but as you're getting into your life, like, there's bits and pieces that have like a lead up,
Mhm.
almost like your favorite storyline. They have a lead up, and then you have like the middle piece, and then you the continuation after the fact. So no, absolutely. Please share all the things. I'm down.
Yeah, so
They don't want to hear, even if they don't want
yeah.
to hear, I do.
Yeah, so it's a wonderful complex because life is complex. And when I say our son survived an illness, people often think about disability coming in a beginning. So
Mhm.
people think about disability coming at the beginning of life. And yet, disability can come at any point. If you live long enough, then you will have a disability, most likely. And that's
Right.
also gnarly to think about. If we live long enough, we're probably going to use a cane or a walker or something else. And that's called getting old.
Right.
But our son survived an illness right before he turned 2 years old. He was this wonderful, typical dude. And I say dude because he was extraordinary. He came into life big and he loved facing the wind and just looking at kites and fireworks and going down the steepest slide when he was very young, like a 1 year old. 1 year olds and steep slides were not always adventurous, but he was. And then right before his second birthday, he started having seizures. And
Oh,
they were big. They were big seizures. The first one happened actually when I was at the first day of a new job. He had 2 year old molars coming in and just those, the drippy mouth and just misery. So he stayed home with my husband, and they were doing the 2-year-old thing. And then out of the corner of my husband's eye, he saw our son, Dallin, go into a massive first seizure, completely with no warning. My husband caught him as he was falling. It was a
Mm.
big, what some folks call grand mal or tonic-clonic seizure. And then the paramedics were called, emergency was called. They came, checked him out. There were no symptoms. There was not a fever. There was not an infection that could be
Hmm.
found. So they released my husband to say, if you can get him to the pediatrician's office, then you don't have to go up to the children's hospital. Pediatrician got them right into the office. No symptoms. There's not an ear infection. There wasn't any sign of even a red little scratchy throat. The pediatrician sent them back home and said, it could be one of those things. Go back home. If you see anything else, give us a call. I was still at work during all of this stuff. Adventure? No, it wasn't exciting at that point.
Right.
They came and picked me up for work, and I looked at them and said, what happened to you two? My husband said, get into the car and we'll let you know. That was the first day. The next day, our son woke up and could not walk. He couldn't feed himself any longer. He couldn't sit up by himself in his little chair with a booster because he was only almost a 2-year-old. The pediatrician was called quickly and they said, get to the children's hospital. So that was the beginning of this new world. He then, our young son, lost all skills as the seizures continued.
Oh,
So when
wow.
I say our grief started, when he was that young, he lost all development. He could no longer sit up or had any expressive language. He wasn't talking any longer. He couldn't sip through a straw or even drink very well. He couldn't eat many foods. During that time, the little boy that we came to the hospital was lost to us
Hmm.
because of all of the medical complexities. The doctors didn't know if he was going to survive. So we sat with the unknown for the next 9 days. He was in the hospital during
Wow.
that time. And as we didn't know if he was going to survive, we sat with the beginnings of grief. Who is this little boy going to be now? He did survive, but our world changed drastically. And what I've come to know from grief, it's been 32 years since that first time in the hospital, because he would almost be 34 now. Is grief is the loss of anything that you can miss. And
Hmm.
that's what we missed, is that little boy that we brought into the hospital. He was needing to learn everything again. He did survive that unknown illness. They never found out what had happened to
Really?
cause what was catastrophic. I love that you're being in this curious mode with us because we stayed curious as well. The doctor stayed curious with us and we never found a reason.
Oh, wow. So when he was 2, and how long did he live? Like, what age did he pass at?
Right before his 22nd birthday.
Okay. And so being this normal, healthy, vibrant 2-year-old, and then all of a sudden having a grand mal seizure, and then just everything just going downhill from there?
So from that first initial illness, he lost all skills. He couldn't do anything. He
You
was
say it
back.
is an illness. Was it did he have something that correlated with the seizures, or was it just the seizures?
So the seizures took everything.
Okay.
The magnitude of the seizures, there was nothing that they could find with those seizures. There was no infection that they could find. There was no, they looked for tumors. They looked for um, anything that could determine what had caused those seizures to begin, they never found that reason for anything to begin. It was deemed a catastrophic illness. We hear about catastrophic things in the world
Mhm.
or among other parts of our spaces now. And it was universal. It took everything, and there was not a reason found for it, not a medical reason for those seizures to have started. It wasn't meningitis, it wasn't um, anything else that they could ever find. Actually, throughout his lifetime, they never found a reason.
Did they do continuous, like, studying, I guess, and testing? And because there's another lady that I chatted with, her daughter, I think she was just 4 or had just turned 4 or was just turning 4, and she put her to bed that night, and the next morning, she didn't wake up. She was gone
Yeah,
at night, and they're still looking for, what could have caused that because she'd had previous healthy checkups, you know, up to that point. And so I just find it, interesting, um, how we don't, we're always trying to hunt down like a reason, like, what is this? Why is this happening to us? Like, how do we move through this? Like, what do we do now? Like, why did we have to lose the little boy that we had just been so blessed with? And not that we're not blessed with the one now, but
yeah,
how do we move forward with this new, prediction that we have? So
yeah.
talk to me about that, like.
Yeah, when we were going through all of those moments in the hospital, and I say moments because he had dozens and then hundreds of seizures as they were trying
Mm,
to control. Seizures are, in my opinion, a beast. They're
mhm,
beasts. And as the seizures were trying to be controlled, because the neurological effect for Dallin was he continued to lose more skills. So not only was he coming in, he could not walk in down the hall in our home, but the more the seizures happened, the less he was able to use his body. It was the neurological effect of the electrical storm of a seizure happening again and again and again that continued to affect his body in relation to those seizures. And they're so individualized that if they were able to pause the seizure, then his body could take a breath, take a pause. So, with the medication, could pause those seizures for a day, then he could recover and pause for it as well. So, in those moments in the hospital, if we had a few hours without a seizure, then that gave him a time to pause. The side effects that came from those medications were also pretty intense. He had a lot of meds in him, and so his body started to feel the side effects. He was little, he was a 2, like he was the 2-year-old you can pick up and toss him, right? Like the little sack of potatoes that you can play with and tickle and tell the sweet stories to, but you can also feel the effects of massive amounts of medication pretty quickly. So those effects of medication was a pretty big balance for his medical team, and they were watching it, and yet the seizures needed to stop, or they would cause their own side effects as well.
mm,
So when he survived the illness and survived the continual seizures, we asked, what do we do now? Which is, what do we need to learn to do with this sweet thing, boy, child,
mhm,
young squire? He became the the prince because he was the prince. He did rule the world. He was the dude who faced the wind, and he kept his personality. He did keep who he was, and what a massive feat. He was so audacious, and he began again. So I love the question of what do you do? We
Mhm.
started. We started with this new space. We didn't know that we were in grief. We
Right.
did wonder what to do now, and we began because we knew nothing. Thank goodness we knew nothing. We didn't know what those doctors'
Right.
perplexed faces were about. We saw them, we said, "Hey, hi, what you got today?" And they were the ones who told us as much as we needed to know, but not any more than that. What a kind bit that was for us as well. We were young, and thank goodness we didn't know what we know now. It's okay to be a little bit in the curvy edges of, gosh, let's go. Let's go.
Right.
We did do that.
Well, that's good. It probably saved a lot of sanity back then with otherwise, being like, "Oh my gosh, this is happening and holy cow, what do we do now?" And geez, just like you walk in, you're like, "Okay, what's it for today? Lay
Yeah,
it
there was enough of that. There was enough of I've counted 40 seizures today. There was
on."
enough of I've got to get him to eat at least one jello. There was enough of he still isn't holding his head up. Oh, wait, there it is. There was enough of the intensity to not be added on with the additional weight of too much. And yet there was enough of the power of what was happening to us. It did begin. And then we went home and started. We did try again.
Okay. And so how long had you and your husband been married? Or I'm not even sure if you guys were married, at that point. How long had you guys been together when little Dallin was born and starting to go through his stuff? I don't
Stuff.
even know what to call it. I don't even know what to call it. His
Yeah, it was his stuff. It was
Yeah.
this conundrum of stuff. We had been married for about 2 years, and we were young. And that was probably a good thing that we were so young and had energy. So it was 2 years, and he came springing in with just joy and let's go for this. He loved life, and he was the oldest grandson on one side of the family and the second grandson on the other side. Nieces and nephews would come later for us. So he had one cousin, but uncles and aunties and grandmas and grandpas and people who adore him and adored him. So I say both present and past tense because that's how it goes then and now.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah, it's hard, losing a child, but having it I don't even know. Like, it's so hard to talk about these things in public. Like, even for me, I'm not infallible to this either. Like, it's so hard to be able to say the right words or without offending someone, through the conversations. But and I can empathize like with being a mom and losing a child. Like my child when she was 19. And so she was much older. And she didn't have like the episodes, like the seizures or anything like that. She had none of that. And hers was just a freak vehicle accident. But still a here today, boom, gone.
Yeah.
And so for your world, you went to work that day and he was this happy, healthy little boy, and you get off of work and you're heading home and you've realized that something is not right and your whole world changes in the blink of an eye.
And
And that,
I think that's where we all sit for these minutes is that's the thing that can change and it makes people unsettled.
Mhm,
I pause when I'm talking with folks because people that I know will say, so what are you doing these days? And I pause.
mhm.
And part of me now says, tell me what you would like to know. Because it used to be this, let me just tell you. And then they would be in their own overwhelm again. And that doesn't feel kind to me. Most of my space does not feel kind to overwhelm others because we're all in our spaces. I don't know fully what others are feeling because it's hard to speak. And hard is the one word we have in this part of our culture to say gnarly, ridiculous, embarrassing, my word, and so many other of the 84 emotions that we can
Right.
talk about. It's hard. And I'm I want to go the emotion wheel out and go into Brene Brown and be like, oh, I've done the work
Right.
for a lot of years. This started 32 years ago for me.
Right.
And then more than 11 when we went to the next place of getting pushed under by a wave. And so I now am trying to be more mindful and mind forward when people say, so what you doing? And because what I want to do is just go down my, oh, I'm just this and this. And I'm like,
Yeah.
just be still. Don't do that all the time because it's really what I am in is not what others are in. And that I I'm trying to be more aware of that. And sometimes people are like, it's just too much. It's just too much. And I say, okay, okay.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of people, it is too much because it's not their story. It's not them doing it. But I know
Yeah.
most people go through hard things. You just don't realize how hard they are until you get, I don't want to say through it, but you get to where you can look back on it, if that makes sense. Because
I
go ahead.
it's hard. And I think part of what Dallin taught us through his life is people get to be around him. His story still is, his
Mhm.
experiences still are, and they get to choose where they are in his experience still.
Right.
And they did while he was in this realm. They
Mhm.
got to choose that because it was hard to watch him go from that extraordinary little dude to surviving an illness to recovering some of those skills. And he didn't get everything back. It wasn't what the doctors thought when they said, you now get to leave the hospital, everything will come back, meaning all of the skills he'll be able to be who he was in 6 months. And we were like, oh, sounds great. It doesn't happen that way. It didn't for him. He did become a wonderful dude again in
Mhm.
his own way. But it changed again over time. And that was hard for a lot of people.
Sure.
And yeah,
So when he left the hospital, was he still having multiple seizures a day?
they had controlled most of them to the point that the medication stopped the big ones.
Okay.
So the big ones, meaning he wasn't having a seizure that would cause him to go into, again, that word is grand mal, but it's tonic-clonic, where his body is shaking. He wasn't having those seizures anymore when he left the hospital. He did every few months come through the level of medication and start having those types of seizures.
Mhm.
So he did for his lifetime continuously have seizures. It was then called um, epilepsy. So epilepsy is when you have continual seizures that aren't controlled always by medication, and his was um, epilepsy. It had many names, but
Sure.
that's that's the easiest thing.
Right.
Yeah,
I suppose it's the easiest one to explain too,
yeah, yeah.
because most people know what epilepsy is now.
Yeah, for sure.
But did they know about it back then? Like,
Yeah, epilepsy's been around for Oh, millennia, thousands and thousands of years. But they have many types. He had all types, all the types of seizures.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and you and your husband, how did that impact your marriage?
When he was in the hospital, we stood at his crib one day, right after, actually, soon after, the doctors had said he'll never walk again. There's a diagnosis called ataxia that is a side effect of a neurological condition. And they said he'll never walk again. He got up the next day and started walking, which is when we were like, oh, so we're going to follow Dallin. We'll listen to what y'all have to say. We're going to follow him. It was soon after that that we stood at his crib because he was so little that he was in a crib. And we decided, okay, so what are we going to do? We're going to follow Dallin and we'll do whatever it takes. Whatever this is, we have no idea what's
Hmm.
coming. But he had survived the illness at that point. He had come to a point that they had determined that he was going to survive whatever this was that ever had come to him. And we stood together and said, yeah, we're going to do this. Not all marriages come through something this big. So we determined then in the hospital, and then we worked really diligently, continually. We talked every time there was a doctor appointment, every time there was a meeting in the schools. We talked about everything. We worked continually to be three. It was always three of us, my husband, myself, Dallin, always.
I love that. You're right, because um, a lot of marriages don't survive it. Um, and it ends up becoming too much, or one can't handle it, or whatever the situation is.
Yeah.
And it's so I'm always curious about your marriage, like the marriage or the parents or whoever is going through it. So kudos to you guys. It's a big challenge, first of all, when your child is sick like that. But then it also puts a challenge on your marriage too, to be able to cope with both at the same time. Because it pulls in a lot of different directions.
Yeah. The next thing that came to us is we actually had that same conversation. We didn't know it, but it was the week before Dallin passed away. And we said, okay, we knew it was close to when he was passing away. We thought we had months left. It turned
Mhm,
out to be the week before he passed away. His body was not able to go longer than that. Bodies change at end of life, and his did quickly, faster than anybody thought, including us, and I think including Dallin. But a week before he passed away, we sat down again and said, are we going to survive this? Are we going to survive Dallin not being here?
mhm. Yeah, it's something you don't normally think about. Like,
Yeah. So we sat there for a couple of moments and we said, yeah,
that's that's wonderful, actually.
yeah, we are.
Um,
And it's intense to have that conversation. He was in the next room watching a movie, still laughing at ridiculous slapstick humor. It was unearthly. It was unyielding. It was almost unnecessary at the minute because he still was living life and he lived life to the last days.
mhm.
And yet, these are the hard conversations that I'm not sure we're always willing or wanting. Nobody wants to. We didn't even want to have that conversation. And yet we had done it 20 years prior to that. And we said, okay, are we going to? Can we do this? Do we want to do this without Dallin in our realm?
Oh, man. Those are definitely some hard decisions, because how long had the doctors given him to live? Had they given him a certain amount of time? Or was it
No,
just day by day, or they weren't sure, or just expect this or that or what else? Or something else?
no, they never did that because again, when they said we don't think he's going to walk again at
Yeah.
2, and then he climbs out of the crib, um, that was like, oh, mm, mm, we're going to watch Dallin. That was also telling us, listen here, watch this. Even with what came throughout his life, which was a lot of twisty turns, his next parts of his world included a lot of unknown illnesses for his lifetime. They
Mm,
don't know, there's not actually a reason why he passed away. They don't know what happened again to cause for his system to change to the point that it could not continue. His systems should have, I say should, air quote, been
yeah.
able to sustain him. But bodies do different things. He had a series of illnesses that I share somewhat because it's still mystified. There's not any reason why his additional illnesses, additional diseases that came to him, and I say that um, mysteriously. He had a degenerative disease that came to him when he was a teenager that they never understood what had happened. Um, there was beautiful muscles that were degenerative. So I know. We just shrug our shoulders and go, what in the world? And all throughout this, Dallin did not care what was happening. He lived as grandly as that young boy who faced the wind and watched kites and fireworks. So he was joyful and became the most resilient, audacious, tenacious. You got to get out of my way because I'm going.
Mhm.
I'm going. So we did that with him and lived that first set of grief, the anticipatory grief. It's going to be coming, but when all of those things with slapstick, let's go, all of the things, because it does change. Grief does change and it does change us.
I agree with that. It changes you in ways that you never anticipate that it's gonna change you.
Yeah,
And you just think that, "Oh my gosh, somebody just lost someone. They should just get right back up and they'll just be doing the same thing that they were before, just without this person in their life." And it
yeah,
just doesn't work that way.
yeah. I think that's what we've learned. So Dallin's story that I love speaking about, I love telling how he became who he was, is a piece. How he did it is the quest. I don't know how he did it. I don't know how he became him, except for that's who he was. That's
I think
how
I
he
know.
came.
I can tell you.
Oh,
I can tell you
sweet.
right now because he had 2 amazing parents that didn't push him into the box of being, labeled as a disabled child or as a child that had this illness, whatever. You let him be and become who he chose to be and become. That is the message that I hear loud and clear coming from you. And that in itself is beautiful because that's probably a lot of what gave him continued life since they had no idea even how he was surviving it and how he kept going.
So, what if we did that
Mhm,
fully? I think that is such kindness for one another.
mhm,
And like you said, your daughter, right?
mhm,
That full life
yeah,
to be able to say the life was there.
yeah, to keep, just loving them. That's it. Just loving them, not trying to contain it, not trying to harness it, not trying to steer it in one direction or the other, but just simply loving them and being like,
And
"Okay, let's fly. Let's go. Let's do. Let's be. Let's become."
yeah, I wonder at times, I have people that I know, friends, that it's very frightening, right, to do that.
Yeah.
There were times when Dallin had those seizures, and they could happen at any time, and they did happen at any time, and yet he loved to be the one to get his own stuff,
Mhm.
like
Wow.
climb up on the chair and get his own chips, and
Mhm.
get his own big old bowl to pour the whole bag of chips into the biggest bowl there was in the house.
Sure.
And yet, climbing on top of that chair at the risk of having a seizure was sometimes making my mama heart go,
Yeah.
how quickly can I get to that chair in case that seizure comes into play?
Yeah.
So I learned to move quickly instead of saying, no, I'll do that
Don't
for
do
you.
that. Right.
Right. So I love that perspective that you've shared because that is the fear. And I sit with the even if I had tried to stop him, he would have so dismissed me. He would have been like, you are not the one I trust any longer.
Correct.
Like
100%.
like you're not that person who I can be with in this space. I did try that at one point. I did try and wrap him in bubble wrap and be the only
Oh,
one
sure.
who, and he was like, you gotta go. You gotta
Yeah.
go now. I need you to be out of here. That was at end of life for him. And he looked at me like, where is anybody else?
Yeah.
Where is anybody but you, mom? You got like, I cannot have you in this space. So we developed ways for him to be independent, even when his body was really needing a lot of support. Not his soul,
Right.
his body. Um, so I appreciate that kindness that you've shared. What a kind soul
Absolutely.
you are. Yeah.
It comes through with everything you're saying and everything you're talking about, the love that you and your husband have for each other, as well as the love that you guys engulfed Dallin with. Dallin, correct?
Hmm.
Dallin. Dallin with, like, his entire life. Um, it just seems so that you created this young little, as you put it, squire, this dude that was fearless and full of spitfire and just wanted to just go and do things and experience life on his own terms and in his own way. But I think it was more because he had you and dad behind him that were giving him the courage to go ahead, be who you are, do what you need to do. And, we'll be here loving you every moment of every way.
Yeah. I also wonder about the spaces we've been in our own worlds, right? You come from your own experiences. We're both very independent humans,
Yeah.
sometimes to the chagrin or bane of our families,
Mhm.
because we just go and take care of it. And yeah, we'll see you when we see you. And I think we were like that when we were born ourselves. And
Yeah.
Dallin was like that when he was born. Like I'm going. If you want to come and be the chauffeur, then good on you. But I really am go climb that mountain. And I love to go skiing. And he was all of those adventurous, wonderful things. And part of supporting each other in our massive layers of grief is allowing each other to still be independent and find our way in, out, over, around, and through what we call grief, which
Mhm.
is this one little word that means a ton. It means a ton for sure.
It absolutely
And
does. I don't know that I mean, people are I think that us as humans, we are capable of withstanding so much. I'm gonna call it pressure because that's what I feel like grief is pressure.
mhm.
It's, and it's literally turning you into quote unquote a diamond, from all of that pressure and you don't realize the pressure that you're under until say like Dallin, took his last breath. And you don't realize that pressure that was pushing you
Mm,
into it, into becoming the person that you are, because you wouldn't be who you are now without all of that pressure that was building it up and pushing it. You
yeah.
wouldn't be able to share his story so freely, or the story of, his life so freely otherwise. And people look at me like, really? You're gonna like wrap that up in a bow like that? I am, because it pushes us to become another version of ourselves and to help those that are in the midst of it to know that, hey, there's a light at the end of this tunnel. There's a light coming through. Here's a hand. You're not alone. And a lot of the times we get into this and it's like, gosh, it's so lonely. Grief is so freaking lonely.
Yeah.
But it's not, only if you choose it to be. But in the thick of it, you're too busy focusing on all the things you have to do at that moment and don't realize that there's a whole world out there that's supporting you. But it's, feels lonely at the moment. So,
I also think that in the first year after Dallin died, I wanted him to be the only experience ever. I wanted it to be so unique. His loss, his
yeah.
only, why can I not just have this be only him? And I could. I
Mhm.
could. It was okay in that first year. I couldn't leave the house without checking to make sure he for sure wasn't in his room. It took me actually 3 years before I left to go to work because I work in the disability realm
Mm.
still. But I left one day for work and went, huh, I didn't check the house. I didn't check my phone to see if somebody had said he had eaten his, all of his foods. He had very specific food needs. And I was like, oh, there you go. I didn't go seeking it again. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, huh. But that first year, I was aching for a solitary experience. And then I got it. And it was extraordinary as the waves crashed. So, right after he died, somebody explained the waves are going to crash and scrape you, and you're
Mhm.
going to feel like you will never breathe again, and then you will come up. And the next one's going to come, and they're going to feel continual, and then you'll get a break, and you'll breathe a little bit longer, and then it will be okay. It will be calmer. It won't be done,
Right.
but it will be a break in between those waves. And I thought, wow, that is horrible. Why are you telling me I will not get a break for a while? And they said, because no one else is going to.
Yes.
And I said, that's the meanest person I have ever met. And yet they were the kindest because they were the only person who took that minute and said, here's what I have felt. It may be similar for you. It's not you're demanding it. It's not. And those waves smashed us to bits in the beginning. And
Mhm.
then we got some sunlight. And then we floated. And then we got less scrape from the coral reef. And now it happens occasionally.
Yeah.
And it's okay to share with one another. I think in grief, perhaps like me, others want it to be only mine. This is so horrendous. It can only be mine.
Mhm.
Okay, I think that's okay. Grief is ours. I spoke to somebody yesterday and they asked me something totally unrelated. And I said, I was devoured 2 years ago by my grief. And they sat back and went, huh, I never would have known that. And I said, no, because it was 2 years ago. And now I'm coming again, again.
Yeah.
And they said, yeah, you are. I said, I know how to do this. I know how to come again off of the scraping of the bottom where I
Right.
can't breathe, because that's what we do for one another. Somebody helped me, I will help somebody else.
I
Dallin
love
did it for me for a long time. He kept looking at me square in the eyes, going, Mom, Mom, I'm right here. Mom. Oh, there you are. Okay, let's go.
it.
Let's
Right.
go. Yeah.
So with have you written any books, any stories? Do you do TED Talks? How do you share his stuff out there?
Yeah, so I wrote a book. It's been out just over a year, and it's called The Boy Who Became More Than We Could Imagine, because by Jove, he did. And the chapters in that book are all titles to songs. So
Okay.
we strummed and drummed and lived by music from the beginning of life for each of us, actually. And then when we became three, when Dallin came into our world, always music. So these chapters tell experiences of his life. It is not a play by play. That would have been 1,000 pages, and I'm the only one who would have ever enjoyed it. So these chapters include like Natalie Merchant and REM and
Okay.
the Beatles and Cher. There's one in there that asks the question, what if? And that's Cher. There's a little bit of Fleetwood Mac and some Bon Jovi. And so those are the experiences that I could bring to the front. It took a few years of presenting about this and thinking about it. And then the words strummed and flowed through me. And that's the book, The Boy Who Became More Than We Could Imagine.
Oh, I love that. That is beautiful. That's so beautiful. And where can everyone find you and follow you and just to see what you're up to and to hear more about Dallin?
So if you want to find the book, you can find it on Amazon or on my website. That's juliapierce.net. You can also find me on Facebook or Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn. I also have a playlist that goes along with the book that is on YouTube or Spotify. So some people have listened to the song and then read the chapter and the song and then the chapter. So those are the places. I do speak on a couple of topics. I love talking about how Dallin found his places and spaces, about how he became who he um, is, how he lived his life. Also about grief, partnering. We partnered with a lot of people to give Dallin his life. So that's all where you can find me if you want to reach out.
Oh my gosh, that is beautiful. Thank you so much, Julie, for being on the Release Grief podcast and sharing Dallin's story, bits and pieces of it. I know there's so much more that we didn't even get into, um, but thank you so much for being on here.
Thank you. It was such a pleasure.
Yeah, and if this story resonates with you, please share it out. Comment below all the things. I don't even know what all the things are anymore because there's so many different things.
Yeah.
But just share the podcast out and like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to this special episode of Release. All the links plus a few extras are posted in the show notes below. And if you think someone you know could benefit by listening to this episode, please share it with them. And as always, keep going, keep being, keep doing. You are amazing.